Have discussed in the previous session about different types of testings, especially in reference to the manual testing part, in reference to integration testing, unit testing, acceptance testing, which is called user acceptance testing, right? So these are all something which we have discussed. In today, I'm going to discuss about database testing. What exactly database testing is all about, and for what purpose database testing is being used. So this database testing is also called as backend testing, because there are two things. One is front end and second is backend. Front end means whatever the user interface screens and all everything we see on screen. This is where generally we call it as front end is. When it comes to backend, nothing but database, because if you see, yesterday also I have explained you, any application we have three layers. One is presentation layer, wherever the user interfaces and whatever the screens we see, everything is under presentation layer. Next is about business layer, where application means writing the code and all everything happens in business layer. The third one about database layer, means whatever the database we are creating for an application to perform. This is where generally database layer come into picture. So normally this database testing majorly useful to us to check the server side web applications, whatever we uses. Because whenever we develop different applications, because we normally applications will be of different types. Some applications we call it as standalone applications. Let me explain you in, I'll write down here. Okay, this is the document I'm using. I will share it to you. Okay. Yeah. Normally, there are different types of applications. Types of applications as follows, right? So what are the different types of applications we have? So the types of applications will be as follows. The first one is called standalone applications. Standalone applications. So before that standalone applications, let me explain you the layers of applications first, because if you see any layers of applications we have, right? So layers of application as follows. The first one about presentation layer, as I mentioned you. Second, business or logic layer. The second one, the third one is about data layer. Third one is data layer, presentation layer, business logic layer, or data layer. So if these three layers are developing under a single platform, okay, single platform, this will be called as standalone application, okay. Whatever the layers, right? So whatever the three different layers we see, so all the three layers are developing under a single platform. This is where we call it as standalone applications are. So the kind of architecture we use is called single tier architecture. The type of architecture we use for these sort of applications is called single tier architecture. Means whatever the three layers, as I have shown you, as I mentioned you some time back. So these three layers will be developed under a single platform. This is where generally we call it as standalone application stands for. The kind of architecture we call it as single tier architecture. The example for the single tier architecture is Excel, right? Whatever the Excel we use. Okay, this Excel is an example for single tier architecture. So if you see an Excel, any Excel file, whatever the presentation means, whatever the inputs you are going to give on an Excel document will be presented on the screen. And whatever the logic you write, for example, any specific logic we are writing, right? Or some calculation we are doing, right? So sum of rows or sum of columns, right? So we want to sum of columns or rows, right? So if that was the case, whatever the calculations we wants to do will be done on the same screen, right? So you can see there, you can see the sum of, because you have an option where we call it sum, and whatever the calculations we do, right? So adding or updating, right? So whatever are we performing, all these will be seen on the screen itself. So business or logic layer, whatever we are implementing, you can see it on the screen. There is nothing hidden, right? So because if you see normal applications and all, coding will be written in the different editor, because yesterday I told you, right? There will be some IDEs will be there. In that IDE, coding will be written irrespective of the language it can be, right? So coding will be written in that. So this is where generally standalone application is. Now, when it comes to data, so if you want to use any Excel, is it always required to have any database? No, there is no database. We require to store the data, whatever you have given, because data layer is also in the same platform. So if you want to give any presentation, means if you want to give any inputs, there won't be any presentation layer as separate. You can see an Excel file where you can give the input, and whatever the calculations in terms of business logic layer, everything can be done there itself. And whatever the data are we storing and whatever the data we are retrieving, everything will be seen on the screen. So whatever the three layers there in the application, in any application, all these three layers will be developed under the single platform. This is where we call it a single tier architecture. The kind of applications which is that we are going to use is called standalone applications. Next one is called client server applications, right? Client server applications. Next one is about client server application. Now, what is meant by client server application? Client server application means, let's say, for example, if you see any, uh, uh, for example, if you see any organization, for example, uh, what I can say, like, let's say, for example, uh, there is a college, right? For example, there is a college. College have a lot of departments, right? So they have a commerce department, right? They may have computers department. They may have even mechanical, civil, right? So different departments are there. So every department will have their own workstations for the purpose of usage. Even library, even in terms of library. But for all this, there will be a server which will be in the school, in the premises itself, of the college itself. You are not accessing this application anywhere from outside. There is a server which is located inside the campus, and whatever the data are we accessing for that to use, we use LAN connection. LAN connection means, which is called local area network. Means through LAN connection, you are accessing the data from the server, and whatever the data you are accessing, the data you will be showing on the screen, right? So this is where generally you are doing. So whenever you are working on the application in reference to the application development we are doing, so whatever the layers are we talking about, either it can be client server applications, or it can be client applications, or it can be server applications. The data is being accessing from the server. So client systems means different workstations using by the users. They access the data by connecting to that particular server, and they perform the activity. Okay, so here there are two different servers are there. One is about client side and second is server side, right? So client side we have to write application. We need to develop an application even in the server side also. So client side is different, server side is different. So client side we have to write the code. We have to develop an application in the client environment, in the client systems, wherein different client system people will access this. Second is a server side application. Server side means where access of server is being performed by the server team, right? So because server, for example, database administrator is the one who is managing the server. So the data is being managed by the administrator, where there is a server. So server side programming we have to write. So these sort of applications are called client server applications. So if the application, it means whenever we write the programming, we develop it in both client and server side. We develop both this in the client and server side, means both in client side as well as server side programming you are writing, right? So hence the application is developing in two platforms. Two platforms. What are those platforms? One is client platform. Second is a server platform. So these sort of applications are called client server applications. So the kind of applications means library management system. Example I can say, right? So library management system, whichever is using in the uh, colleges, right? So some these sort of applications, these applications we call it as client server applications. So for this, we use uh, two-tier architecture. The kind of architecture whatever we use is called two-tier architecture. This is the second one. The third one, which is called three-tier architecture or multi-tier. Okay, I can say three-tier architecture. Three-tier architecture means if the application is developing in multiple areas, this is called generally three-tier architecture is means three different layers. Generally, these applications are we using. So this is where generally this three-tier architectures and all, right? So the kind of web type of the kind of entire applications and all everything. These are the different types of architectures. What is that we use, right? So different three-tier architectures and all everything are we using here. So uh, in this three-tier architecture, whatever the kind of in this three-tier applications and all, three-tier applications, we can say the kind of architecture, whatever we use is called three-tier architecture, right? So three-tier. After that, n-tier. At the same time, cloud architecture based applications will be there. But at the same time, web applications, this is where generally we normally is called web applications and all, where we are accessing the applications through web. This is where generally web application stands for. So web applications means you are connecting to an internet through an URL, you are connecting it. Make sure you need to have an internet connection, for example, right? If you have an internet connection where you are accessing this application from web, through web, using using that URL and all everything, you are accessing the application. And whatever the server, that particular site, right? For example, um, you're shopping in Amazon, right? So you are using Flipkart. Or else, for example, uh, you are using Facebook, right? So different Instagram, right? So server located somewhere, and the application whatever are using for any of the purposes, end of the day, you are connecting to that server and you are using it. This is where generally we call it as web application stands for, means we are connecting the application in web. So this is where generally web application stands for. So whenever we are working on web applications, there are different types of web applications normally we have, right? So there are three general applications types, right? So three type of web applications we have. So type of web applications as follows, right? So what are the different type of web applications we have? The first one is called static web application. The first one is called static web application. Web application. The second one is called the second one is called dynamic web application. Whereas the third one is called progressive web applications, right? So these are the three different type of web applications which normally we use. Static web applications means whatever the information are we talking about, so this information will be static, right? So there you don't see any changes required, right? So the applications remains standard, and whatever you have, you will be mentioning there, right, on the application and all everything, which is very static in terms of the usage. So you don't see any dynamic thing, because let's say, for example, if you want to make any changes, right? So that sort of changes are not something required. Means if you want to add any video, or if you want add any photo, right? So any things if you want to do, so that sort of thing won't be there in the static mode. Static means which is standard, I can say. So where there is no flexibility for us to make some changes out of it. This is where static web applications stands for. Second is dynamic web applications. Dynamic web applications means when if you want to make any kind of changes in the application, means for example, if you want to add any videos, or if you want to add any photos, all these things are comes under dynamics web application. So static web applications which are static in its size, whereas when it comes to dynamic web applications which are dynamic in terms of the usage is concerned. The third is called progressive web applications. Progressive web applications means these applications require an upgradation every time. Let's say, for example, uh, any e-commerce kind of applications we are using nowadays. So these are all the e-commerce related applications, or any organizational based applications which require a progressiveness. Progressiveness means you will be moving to the next level, wherein by adding some new features and functionalities, entering into the new lines of business. All these things are comes under progressive web applications. So you are progressing this to the next level. You are adding some new requirements into the existing one, and you are moving further. This is where generally we call it as progressive web applications are. Now, this is where generally web application stands for, right? So now if you want to see Web applications, first of all, layers. That's where generally I have discussed about the layers. So these are the different type of applications. One is standalone applications. Second is client server applications. Third is at the same time three-tier web applications and all that. At the same time, cloud applications. Cloud applications means we are developing an application, but this application in the cloud environment. Example is cloud-based point of sale system, right? We are developing a point of sale system application, but we are developing, we are developing it in on-premise. There is no on-premise here. So where are we developing this application? This application we are developing in the cloud environment. Either it can be AWS, it can be Azure, right? So any of the cloud service provider we choose, and we develop the application in the cloud environment. Whatever the required infrastructure for application to perform, whatever the software or whatever the platform do we need, all these things will be provided by the cloud service provider. Means complete infrastructure related or platform or software related services, everything will be taken care of by the cloud service provider. So what is that we are doing is we are simply making use of those services, and whatever we have used, we have to pay for that. That's only the thing you do, right? So you are not maintaining any servers or protecting the data by installing these firewalls, right? So that sort of things are not required usually. Security related things you don't need to, right? So everything will be taken care of by the cloud service provider. But for every service, there will be a charge. So they charge, if you want any services, they will be charging some X amount of services to that, wherein you have to make a use of it, right? So this is where generally the type of applications which will be there. So now coming back to our point, whenever we are talking about database testing, whatever the kind of database related things, like for example, if there is any defects in the database, whatever we have created, okay? Because let's say we have created a database. So database management system, where we have created database, where we have created some database structure, database designing was done by the database administration team people. At the same time, they have created some tables, data tables. Let's say, for example, if you want to update the information of the customer, right? So how do you do in point of sale? For example, what sort of application POS is? POS is a kind of application where you are updating the data of the customer who has purchased the products in your retail shop. Okay. So customer name, customer contact number, email address, maybe mailing address, and whatever the products they have purchased so far and how much billing happened, right? So in last 1 month, how much billing a particular customer has made and what kind of products were moving fast, because especially from the context of retailing, people want to know which product is moving faster, which product is moving slow. They want to know that. It's not about who is that customer on that, right? So because they sometimes they may require, it depends on the decision if they want to take. They see the age group, they see the gender also sometimes, because sometimes gender is also required. Age group is required. So these are the two basic parameters they will be taken, but which product is moving faster, which product is moving slow, right? So they want to know about these reportings, because this is all something useful for them to understand and as well as to take a decision when they are working on the application. So whenever there is some database designings and all everything, whenever we create, there may be a possibility in terms of the defects might be taken place. There may be some deadlock of data, right? So at the same time, data corruption might be taken place, right? So because due to the security firewalls or protecting security firewalls may not be so perfect, right? So due to that, there are possibilities sometimes corruption of data or else the same time loss of data will be there, right? So what we have to do again, we need to retrieve the data, right? So whatever the loss of data we have, there are multiple softwares we use. Using those softwares and all, we have to retrieve the data back. So that shouldn't be the case. End of the day, data corruption and as well as data loss should not arise. So for that, what is required? It's always important for us to understand about the kind of testing. Means whenever the database testing we do, we will make sure whenever the server side or database, this is where I told you, right? Server side. What is server side? There are two kind of things I told you. One is client side, server side. Client side means user, right? So if you take any organization or a college, as I told you, maybe students may use that or professors or anybody use it. These are the users. These are the systems, and whatever the applications and systems they use are called client systems. Clients means people, users. These people have an authority to use the application and maybe update the application. That's it, right? So delete, edit, these sort of permissions won't be there to them because they don't have any authority. So we will have this authority. This authority will be there in the person who is having the server side. Server side means database administrators will have that role and they have that authority, right? So whether if they want to add any person, right? So if they want to delete any, if they want to remove any person or if they want to edit any details further to be added, right? So all these things will be done by the database team. So this is where generally I call it a server side. So server side means database side. Server side programming we have to write. If you remember, when I explained about client server applications, I told you. So whenever we are creating a database from the server side programming, whenever we write, whatever the kind of testing we want to perform, this testing is called database testing. So majorly this database testing is the one which is majorly useful for the team to understand about what are the what is there any possibility of data corruption or losses might be taken place, right? So how to correct that, right? So that we come to know, so that data security and all everything will be taking into consideration. Now, whenever we are working on database testing, there are different things which are included in it.